All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, the land of plaid and coffee, and PacWest Bigfoot. So, we are going to get started right now on the next Bigfoot encounter. But first, I just wanted to let you guys know that there is another great podcast out there on Spotify if you'd like to pick it up. I know I listen to it all the time. It's a good friend of mine, Mike, out there at Bigfoot's Wilderness. You can check that out. And also, yes, of course, I do want to give a shout out to my good friend Gunner out there. That's right. Don't forget, Gunner not only really odd. Has the best coffee in the world over at squatchcoffee.com, but he is also one of the members of a great little show as well called Monster X Radio. If you guys want to get over there and check out some really cool Bigfoot reports and discussions and all of that, you will absolutely love it. So with that, let me get a sip of Squatch coffee real quick. And once in a while, I'll take a little sip if you don't mind. It's early in the morning. It's fall. Let's get into it this week. And today we have crabbing with Bigfoot on the Oregon coast. It moved off slowly into the trees and fog high above me along the rugged coastline and out of sight. That was the last time I'd seen him, the last time I'd be crabbing with Bigfoot. I pulled up the crab pot, and while I know these things are probably dangerous, I felt an emotion I had not felt in a very long time as he disappeared. The feeling of loss. Crabbing with Bigfoot. I am 39 years old. I started crabbing about 6 years ago along the Oregon coast, between the flat beaches and the rugged cliffs and mountains that edge the sea. I love the fog, the rugged coastline, and coffee as black as my lovely wife's hair. I will keep my exact location to myself, however, simply because I would hate to see it get overcrowded. Not to mention, well, it's a special place for two reasons. One, because it was where myth became reality. And two, it was a place my wife and I loved to walk. Yes, walk, and not on the water. But it all started when I got married at the age of 28. Gail was perfect in every way. Beautiful, gracious, extremely forgiving, and had to be. I was a fisherman, a crabber actually, and I was often late getting home or sometimes slept on the boat. I was so busy. The business was a good thing though. Even she enjoyed the opportunity to be a stay-at-home wife, and hopefully soon enough a mother. That was the plan we had, to have a family and a small crabbing business along the Oregon coast for decades to come. Every morning I was sent off with a kiss, and a smile, and the smell of her shampoo. I hated being out on the ocean overnight, and not because I hated being on the ocean. I loved my work, I loved the ocean, but I missed her every minute I was out there. Of course, we chatted on the phone when the weather was nice between dropping pots and letting them soak. And between soaks, I would fish for bait and, of course, income. I had some local buyers near me, some restaurants mainly, but a few grocery stores. All of it was enough to keep the wife and me, and, as we had planned to have at least 2 kids, comfortable with family vacations saved up for, overhead and repair savings on hand just in case, and yes, pay the mortgage and bills and all. Life was good. Goodbyes are hard. A few months before my wife slipped away to be home with the Lord, we did jokingly bring up the subject she always found interesting, Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, as she called it. She was actually part Native American, and while she was a faithful lover of the Lord, she heard the tales and stories of these beasts that roam this part of creation. It is so weird that she would even mention it, and even weirder because of what would transpire not a few years later. She passed away. Quietly, though, and without too much pain, the doctor would say. Cancer was the culprit. My faith was shaken, not broken, but shaken for some time after that day. I turned a lot to crabbing and fishing, and business was as busy as ever, and that was a good thing. The foggy, damp mornings and evenings of setting pots and fishing while drinking that black coffee and listening to our favorite songs or our favorite team, the Mariners, on the radio was all I wanted to do. I loved her with everything I am. And now, she was gone. But the good Lord and my lovely wife sent me something, a message, I believe, through what has to be as unique, as indifferent as a burning bush to Moses. I was sent Bigfoot. Well, hello there. She used to walk up there sometimes and wave down to me. I can never hear a word she was saying, but she yelled, "I love you," sometimes, but the wind and the ocean waves crashing nearly 100 feet below her muted any attempt she made. I knew when she did, though, she would kiss her hand and throw it out to me. Usually she was on a morning walk when I'd see her high above the sea, stopping to wave at me or blow me that kiss from between the near cliffs and the trees that stood like soft towering ghosts in the low clouds and fog behind her. I walk there sometimes with her. I miss those walks. Once, looking back, we did have a weird encounter with something up there. Well, it was a feeling she had at first, but nothing was heard or seen, and the feeling disappeared soon enough. Now I know what was there. Personally, I believe it was the same one I saw now. That first morning, years later, I would see it. Something amazing and frightening all at the same time. It would not be the last time either. The pots were set early that morning. I would let them soak for a bit and get some fishing in. I was low on bait, and the refrigerator at home was running low as usual. But I was fishing when I naturally looked up again at the cliffs and the thin opening of area that stood between the tallest trees in the world and the edge of the sea. That is when I caught myself wide-eyed and practically dropping the rod and reel I was setting up. Something was walking, or someone was walking, along the edge, moving slowly in and out of the area and the trees. My heart skipped a beat, and then my brain caught up to it. I remember it could not be her, yet someone was up there nonetheless. I watched for a few moments as they walked. I could not tell who it was, but I could make out that it was someone walking. That was for sure. And they seemed to be wearing pants and a jacket that matched in color. At least that is what I thought at first. I kept staring at them as they walked. The more I stared, the more lonely I felt, actually. The more I stared, the more awkward the person seemed to be up there, too. They were tall for sure and walked as though it were some professional basketball player with a ball in hand weaving in and out of defenders, being represented, of course, by the trees. It was weird, to be honest. Very, very weird. I headed back to the house, our house, where I knew the only thing waiting for me was fish that needed to be cleaned and crab sold to whom it would belong. A ghost in the clouds. A few days later, I would be back at sea. This time I hugged my little cove a little closer with my boat. The tide was a bit high, and I knew I could get some great crabbing done. Plus, there was a ton of rockfish hiding down amongst the rocks. The rocks I knew so well. I dropped the pots and set my fishing lines. I turned on the radio and sat back for a few. Again, I looked up high above the cliff. This time, I had some lower power binoculars in my coat pocket. I pulled them out and started at one end of the small open area to the other, just searching to see if anyone was up there. There was. Again. At first I thought it was the same person from days ago. The same color of clothing, seemed to be the same height, and definitely the same gait as they walked. But no sooner did I start thinking this was not a person. I had a fish on. I put down the binoculars and reeled in a decent-sized rockfish, but the whole time I just wanted to see what in the world was up there above the cliffs. I tossed the fish into the holding tank next to me, grabbed the binoculars again, and it was still there. And this time, when I spotted it, it was bent down, well, squatting more like it. It seemed to be picking at something along the ground. And to my surprise, it was not human. Even from this distance, via not so powerful pair of binoculars, I could tell it was, well, a Bigfoot. Crazy, I know. That is what I was staring at. For a moment, that memory of the two of us having that weird moment up there flashed through my mind, and now I know what was there. As it began to move, it seemed so graceful and awkward at the same time, if that makes sense at all. That is just how it seemed. It was like a ghost in the fog and trees, weaving in and out and only stopping to crouch down and pick at things I could not make out from the ground. I do know that the hillsides up there are packed full of berries and some wild bulb-like flowers. Maybe it was gathering and eating them, I thought. Either way, I was mystified by it. Freaked out a bit, too. It was the strangest looking thing I'd ever seen, after all. This continued for about 15 minutes, give or take. I kept an eye on it as I did with my fishing, which was good that particular day, really good. And by the time that thing moved off northward, it disappeared into the trees and fog and did not come back the rest of the morning that I knew of. For the first time in a long time, a long, long time, I caught a smile forming on my face. And I knew it was a Bigfoot. I just knew it. Far above the clouds. A few days after the visual, I noticed it was not around, at least not out foraging as it was, so I decided to go up there one Sunday, before church, and see if I could find anything interesting about this Bigfoot. I was nervous about heading up there that morning. Being even foggier than usual, the scene was completely ominous, and my senses were more alert than they usually are while down below on the boat fishing and crabbing on the ocean. That was for sure. I looked first for footprints. Reading up a bit about these things throughout the previous week, footprints were the most obvious sign of Bigfoot I was to be looking for. There were other signs I was to be looking for as well, like broken limbs, those X formation made of branches, fecal matter, nesting sites, and so on. I found nothing except for the obvious. The bulbs on those plants, many were missing. The berries looked all but picked completely and strewn here and there. Sign of Bigfoot? Well, if I would have never seen it, I'd probably think deer or any other animal. I kept walking for a bit, well, to the end where the woods started up again. Looking into them as far as I could, I felt rather skeptical, even a bit scared and fearful of walking into them. And that is when I noticed movement. Something walking and in and out of the trees. Again. However, this figure seemed, well, short. I watched the silhouette come closer and closer to me, weaving and bobbing in and out of the trees and brush. Then, after the clouds and fogs thinly briefed, I saw a smile on the face of a woman walking out of the tree line. Her name was Rachel. After a short introduction, she said she was a biologist studying some of the flora and fauna. She mentioned that she lived and grew up among she mentioned that they lived and grew among the high seaside cliffs of the Oregon coast. Again, and most profoundly, I found myself smiling. We chatted for what seemed an hour, walking around the side of the hill, or cliff, more like it. I told her and showed her where I fished and crabbed, and then, well, I told her why I was up there. Hey, she asked first. Funny, but she said she noticed that many of the berries and bulbs were all but gone, and noticed that there was almost no deer and other animal track around, something I did not actually notice myself after thinking about it. She did not seem shocked at my answer either. In fact, she too thought it was a Bigfoot, to my surprise. That started us talking and conversating so much that it turned into a coffee back in town for nearly 2 hours. Bigfoot. The conversation had me smiling for a change, and deep inside, as Rachel spoke, I felt something else. Happiness seeping through. On the boat. It had been a few weeks since coffee, but Rachel wanted to know if she could come with me on the boat and see if she too would be able to see this thing and she wanted to get some research on the tuft puffins that lived among the cliff seawalls that surrounded my little secret cove. It was an enthusiastic yes. I was surprised at how fast I answered. On the boat, it was another foggy morning. So foggy, in fact, the cliffs and mountainsides were hardly visible for a while. So Rachel learned a bit about crabbing, fishing, and she used her own set of high-powered binoculars to watch the puffins, but not before she giggled at my set of binoculars first. It was nice having her around. My wife sometimes came, not too often, but I remember how nice it was to have another person to talk with sometimes on a frigid, dark Oregon coast morning. About an hour in, and the sun was starting to make headway again against the fog, Rachel let out an almost squeal of excitement and grabbed me by my hoodie, pulling me over to her. She pointed in the direction and handed me the binoculars. They really were powerful. I could see that thing as if it were 10 feet in front of me. Of course, the fog created a complicated view of the face itself, but I could see it was orange and brown in color. The hair covered its entire body. It was tall like I had noticed with the smaller binoculars before, but now I could guess it was nearly 8 feet tall, or a bit more for sure. We continued watching it with our own binoculars as it moved here and there, foraging for the remaining berries and bulbs it left behind during its last visit, not to mention the new growth, as if it knew when they would be available again. As reported, its arms were extremely long, really long, weird long, to be honest. It moved gracefully, though, through the area, but still had a sort of awkwardness to its stride or gait, if you will. It was hunched a bit at the waist as it moved, and we think that this is what added to the unnatural stride it seemed to have. At least it seemed unnatural to us. Suddenly, as if it knew it was being watched, which seemed very ironic in this case, it turned and faced us. Literally, it stared right back at us and made a noise we could actually hear over the crashing waves, like a howl of sorts. And it again turned and walked off into the woods. To this day, we have never seen it since. Rachel and Bigfoot. Yes, I said we have never seen it since. That Bigfoot above the sea. Rachel and I hit it off, and she too, like me, loved the sea. Loved being out in creation, and yes, loved baseball, surprisingly enough, too. However, she was an A's fan, but I told her I could look past that fact. To this day, I still crab and fish the same place, and with one more child on the way, Rachel and I are making some great headway in building our little family of biologists and or future crabbers. But every morning, I am out there, in and around the cove. I look up there along the cliff, wondering if that Bigfoot would ever be back, or if it was just here to bring me a family full of blessings that now fills my life each and every day. And to that I say, thank you, Lord, thank you, Gail, and thank you, Bigfoot.